Hello and welcome to All Together Now. I am so happy to be back after my brief hiatus. I am delighted that we can be together tonight, and we do have a wonderful show for you with two people whose work helps to shape the way we understand the world around us. Journalist Brian Shactman and artist and community organizer Miranda Ashleen. Brian and Miranda are very different in terms of their tools and practices, so we are in for some very interesting conversation. Brian Shactman is an anchor for NBC Boston, and prior to that, he was at ESPN, MSNBC, and CNBC, where his work was nominated for an Emmy. Welcome to the show, Brian. Lovely to see you, Brian.
Yes.
As a local journalist, you're seeing this disruptive time in American history from the perspective of one who reports. And what are some of the surprises you've encountered?
Well, I mean, I think there's a surprise around every corner, Bobbie. And journalistically, I think about it's a great question because there are so many things that I did not expect. I mean, I finished up covering, the New Hampshire primary, and literally like 2 weeks later, politics, as I knew it, was vaporized, and everything was focused on this. But when I think about that question, I think about how we've covered it, and the numbers and the number of cases and deaths and hospitalizations and people on ventilators got so big so fast. Yet I don't feel like we did a good enough job quickly enough letting people know that these were real people with real stories. They were a grandfather, an uncle, a brother, an aunt, a grandmother. And I think because we didn't get those, put the face to the death, to the story, I think that some people didn't buy into believing in what was happening quick enough. And I think that we've caught up, and I think we're starting to understand the impact that we're having during this. But I think we could have done more to humanize what was going on. It became numbers, and people got inured to it. And the other thing that I was thinking about, when you asked me this question, is the politicization is, I mean, the last 3 years, everything is politicized. But when it came to like public health or my parents or wearing a mask, there's certain elements of what's going on that I never anticipated would be political. I just thought they would be human or American, and that has been difficult to nuance in my work. And the last thing, it's sort of to peel the onion behind the scenes. Bobbie, the newsroom is a place of energy. There are people, there's sharing of ideas, there's disagreement, there's yelling, there's a whole host of things that go on in a newsroom. It's not like the classic newsroom like you might see in the old days, but it still is a newsroom. And now sometimes I go in and I anchor maybe on a weekday, or there's 12 people there. Usually over 10, 15 times that. So the culture of the newsroom has changed as we're all over the place. And that to me has not been a surprise. It's been a shock how it's impacted sort of our collaborative effort.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Brett, I feel like a part of what you're saying about how hard it was to convey the pain of the losses caused by COVID gets to the role of journalism and the essential responsibility. What is it for reporters, for journalists? Are you telling me a story? Are you helping me to understand something else? And I think the role has, to me, expanded because we so much need to hear, to see, to understand.
It's interesting because there's so many ways to attack this. I think that the local newspaper going away essentially has made the fact that we're still here, I think it gives us more responsibility, and we have to carry a burden of not just, there used to be so much rip and read, Bobbie, where we take a good story from the newspaper and that would be a story we did. Now we have to generate our own ideas, do our own reporting. I look at what I do as my job is to connect to people, give them information they need for the day, maybe give them something to feel good about, and then tell them exactly what's going on. I think with Fox News and MSNBC and all this stuff, people think I'm supposed to be there giving opinion, and I still look at my job as to give the story and the facts without my subjective opinion. Even now, more and more, I'm getting pressure to maybe do more in terms of that subjectivity. But I believe that now that the newspaper has taken a back seat, we have to be more enterprising than we had been in the past. And I think that's an adjustment because that takes investment. It takes money, it takes talented people. And I think more importantly, what we can do that still isn't being done is we can bring the voices of people to the masses. And I think that that's what we focus on, especially now that we're really focusing on trying to do the good and the bad. I mean, I love these stories. I don't know if you've seen them, whether it's the drive-by birthday parties or the graduations. Like, we have to find the joy along with the pain. And I think that's our responsibility to do that as well.
I agree. I agree. And certainly, we all need that. We so much need that. I mean, and here, I would say you're in the trenches more than many, if you will. How do you stay grounded personally?
I go home.
Mm.
If there's any issue with humility, I got 3 kids under the age of 15 and a wife who works really hard. I think for me, I've been able to stay grounded because I look at it from a professional standpoint. But I will tell you, the last 3 weeks have been really difficult. For some reason, I never got to interview John Lewis, but for some reason, his death and then everything that's sort of happened since has been sad for me. So when I think about him as a human being, I'm like, we just don't make people like that anymore. Like, they're not, I don't know where they are, because I couldn't do what he did and have that kind of intensity and that kind of grace at the same time. And so I think to stay grounded, I think I just try to do the best that I can at home, get love where I can from my family, and that's really it, Bob. Because I mean, it's hard when you really think about all that's going on. I mean, I have some friends who are very smart people, some academics who think this is sort of the course of empire here, and this is America on the backside of the mountain, or in the 8th inning of a 9-inning game, whatever you want to call it, and that's difficult to accept if it's true. And so we have a lot of stuff and so I don't know if I mentioned this to you off camera, but I just want to do a good job with my kids, give them good values. So if they could be a part of making the world better than they can, great. And then I'm going to do the best I can in my little sphere, because it's not easy to be grounded. So I don't know if that's a great answer, but I try to just remember why I'm doing what I'm doing and find the joy at home when I can.
No, thank you for that. And here you were 3 months in New Hampshire covering the presidential candidates during the primaries. Oh, and intense to say the least, I'm sure. And maybe we are on the back end. I like to think that we're moving out of that into some whole new realm. But
hopefully.
Then again, I'm a Pollyanna today. Tomorrow, I may not agree with that at all. So what do we need to know about do you think about the process that you witnessed, or
right.
the candidates that you saw? Here's a big one for you.
Yeah.
How democracy works or doesn't.
Well, I will tell you, you spend a week in New Hampshire during the primary, and you'll actually have some faith in democracy, Bobbie. It's fun. I mean, you can sit. There are people who would show up at a diner 2 hours before a candidate would get there. They get a table. They probably have 5 cups of coffee trying to stretch out their tab. And then they get their opportunity to go face to face with Joe Biden, or Andrew Yang, or, whatever candidate might be there that day, Senator Bennett. There's a whole host of people, Elizabeth Warren, that I watched do what they did. And they have to answer the question whether, I remember somebody waited 2 hours in a diner to ask something about the American Disabilities Act. Out of the blue, Amy Klobuchar got asked something about the American with Disabilities Act. And not only does she has to answer it, and she doesn't want to mess it up, but the cameras are rolling on everything now. So if you're not accountable to this, or if she gets frustrated, or we got it. We're there. And so it's really intense, but at the same time, it's really retail politics. So I loved it really gave me a lot of positive energy for democracy. I don't get the sense, and I think Joe Biden's a great American and he's a patriot and he's going to serve this country, but you don't get the sense that the best person's going to win. Like everyone told me how Cory Booker was the most incredible candidate, and when I was in the room with him, he was so intense and powerful and charismatic, and he went nowhere, right? And so, what is it that makes it work for this candidate or the other candidate? And I don't know, but I will tell you, to be able to be up close and to be able to talk to these people one on one was like one of the big. And I've covered a lot of stuff. Was one of the biggest privileges I've ever had, because I love that process. So I don't know if the right thing happens in the end, but I tell you, the people of New Hampshire take it seriously, and it was really fun to watch them go through it.
Wow, that's very illuminating, and positive, so positive. I just want to go back to, I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about how you were taught. I believe you said in a rehearsal that, to give the facts and not to put yourself into the interpretation of
Right.
what's going on. I think I would have an incredibly difficult time with that. Don't exactly have a poker face, but, I think, I think the outrage in this particular time, particularly around the violence against people of color, and indigenous peoples would just not allow me to be in a neutral place. Yeah. So let's just talk about that a little bit.
It's hard. I mean, it's funny because I remember when I left CNBC to go to MSNBC was a big risk for me, and I did most of my work on Morning Joe with Mika Brzezinski and with Joe Scarborough, and Mika basically was like, "What do you stand for?" And I was like, "Well, that's not how I operate. But if I was going to sit in on these panels, I had to have an opinion, and I had trouble getting there. And I think it probably hurt me a little bit. I just don't think I was emotionally ready. So when I look at my work as an anchor, as a reporter, I truly have to I have to do the story, and I can't take a side when it comes to politics, especially. But when you go outside of that to more conversational stuff, I think I've worked as I've matured and gotten older. I've understood where I can and where I can't. If I host a radio show and I'm me, I'm going to be me. If I'm working for NBC and representing NBC on NBC Boston, it's not my place. My place is to give you the information, let you make the decision. But the question is, you don't think you could do it. It's hard, and it's getting more and more difficult to do that. And that's why, I've tried to do more stuff like what we're doing now, or some more podcasting and radio work where you can actually take those sort of shackles off a little bit. Now, I love journalism on both sides, but I do think that too much, the average person at home is listening to that television and watching that television and thinking what they're being told is fact, and they don't do the work, or they don't go far enough to know the truth. And this is the last thing. I don't know how much more time we have, but the thing that I have really come to struggle with lately, Bobbie, is truth. The way Twitter is, or Instagram, or whatever, we get so many versions of the truth that even I think I'm pretty discriminating. I don't know what's true and what's not sometimes. And I don't know what credence to deep state or not deep state, or who said what first, or who's credible and who's not credible. I will tell you, even the discerning eyes don't know. And that's frightening. That's frightening to me, whether you have some people are forming opinions on falsehoods, right? And
absolutely.
So I'm trying to do the best I can to speak the truth, but I to your point, it is getting a little bit more difficult. But I look at my objectivity as a journalist as part of my job.
Yeah. Well, listen, I could tell. It doesn't mean that you don't have opinions. You just need people who are watching to be able to form their own opinions, and that's why truth and honesty.
If I was on Fox News at 9 at night or MSNBC at 8 at night, then I would approach it differently. But I'm on NBC Boston at 6 at night and 11 at night, and I'm there to give you the information you need, and you can do with it what you want.
Well, thank you, because we need you. We need you very, very much, as we're so hungry to understand.
Can I just say one thing? It doesn't mean I'm not emotional. I just want, I think we talked about this earlier. If something's really funny or really sad, I will emote. I react. I just don't take something and go political with it, right? When something's funny, I laugh. When something's sad, I get choked up. Just like everybody else. But it's not a cool and a callous look at it. It's more just, when it comes to the information, I try to approach it professionally.
Yes, yes. Well, Brian, I am so thrilled that you are joining us tonight because, as I say, we never had a journalist on the show before, and your perspective, I think, is a very important one. And I appreciate your sharing with us.
It's great to be
And
with you, Bobbie.
sometime we'll have to have a cuppa
Yeah.
and talk about it.
Cup of what?
And
Cup of wine or cup of coffee? Either one's good with me.
all right, me too. And you know what? I hope your kids and your wife and you find things to laugh at and find the joy and stay safe.
Thank you.
And take care, Brian.
You too.
Wow, what an interesting conversation. Uh, I'm so happy that Brian joined us tonight. And our next guest is also an inspiration to me. She's quite young. I won't tell you how old, but so wise. And she is the artist, author, and community organizer, Miranda Ashleen. And Miranda's mission is to reconnect art to daily life, in her own life and in all of our lives. She lives in a tiny house that she created and is a committed oil painter whose pieces focus on process, experimentation. I have marbles in my mouth tonight, and play. Miranda is also a classical pianist and a singer-songwriter. Her book is called Don't Make Art, Just Make Something. Welcome, Miranda.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I love that philosophy. Don't make art, just make something. Your degree is in community arts. Why did you choose that path? And what prompted that in your life?
So, I'm an oil painter by training, as you mentioned. And when I was studying painting in college, I knew even then that I didn't want to try and make a financial career based off of my artwork. But I did want to make a career where I was surrounded by art every single day so that I wouldn't lose it, as so often happens. So I looked at art therapy, I looked at art education, and then in my sophomore year of college, I went on a trip to El Salvador with community artist Claudia Bernardi, and through her work saw the true power of art to heal individuals and communities. And I came back and knew I wanted to start a community art center, so I've been working on it ever since.
Uh, so when you tell us a little more about that trip to El Salvador?
Sure, yeah. So Claudia took the college group that I was with to El Mozote, which was the site of a horrific massacre in the El Salvadorian Civil War in December of 1981. And she actually visited with her sister, who was on the Argentinian forensic unit, to be there as the site was excavated, and went back years later to help rebuild the church that had been the site of the massacre and to cover it with murals and stories. So I went there when I was 16. I found the names of the children who had been my age in 1981. I gardened in El Jardín de Paz, the Garden of Peace, and realized that that's what art can do. Outside of white-walled museums and big box galleries, art can truly give story to those who we've lost. And I think that's particularly important right now.
Right. Uh, so you are, as I mentioned, a committed oil painter, among other artistic pursuits. And we have some images we're going to show of your recent paintings. Talk a little bit about how these paintings were generated and why.
Sure. So my work is completely reactionary. I never know what the painting will look like. Part of the fun is figuring out when it's done and if it's done. But I've been painting in the same style for about 12 years now, since I was in college. And about 8 years ago, or about 2 years ago, I realized that it was getting a little routine. Even the play and the experimentation, I was falling into known territory.
Mm.
And so I decided that I needed a new challenge because creativity thrives in the face of challenge. And so about 2 years ago, I made my first monochromatic painting. And despite the fact that my paintings usually involve every single color, I said, you only get one. Let's see what happens. And I took that and ran with it when COVID hit, and I needed something to chew on and to grab onto and submerge myself in. So I decided to make a series of monochromatic paintings because I still love color. I couldn't take the color completely away. I just decided that each painting only gets one color. So then I made 7 paintings, one in each color.
Mm-hmm. And they're so interesting too. And what a task to put forward for yourself. Obviously, you think a lot about your artistic process. And what do you think COVID has done to change in your process in any way?
Well, I think it's deepened it. I mean, as an interdisciplinary artist, I have many processes and different ones bubble up at different points of my life. My oil paintings, I don't necessarily work through my emotions. Instead, I achieve a kind of Zen-like quality by the process itself.
Mm.
My singer-songwriting, I'm always processing actually what's happening in my brain. Through my event organization, I'm building community. And that was taken away from me in this time period. So much of my art is in connection with other people. So during this time, I've delved more deeply into the ones that are still safe for me to do on my own, which included, for the first 2 months painting, I did that most days. And then more recently, I've been diving into my songwriting as I've been thinking through what's happening to me personally and all of us as a collective in this moment.
Well, we're going to hear one of your songs in a bit, but I'd like to mention your book again, Don't Make Art, Just Make Something. And you wrote that, was it, were you journaling, or did you set out to write this book to share, or how did that happen?
So it was actually my master's thesis, not quite as organic and inspiring, but I wanted to create something for my master's thesis that would be used beyond my education. So often we write these big papers that then sit on the shelf. So I wrote a book as my thesis project, and then I did write a paper about my book, which was a lot of extra pages. And then I went out on the streets and sold it. And it really encapsulates my approach to art and creativity, which is really my approach to how to live well overall.
In rehearsal, you were talking about creativity versus art, or calling oneself an artist, and how you look at that.
Yeah, so one of the core concepts of that book is separating art from creativity. So often these words are used synonymously, and in order to be creative, you have to be artistic, or in order to be artistic, you have to be creative. But what I did in that book, and what I try and do in my work, both within my personal process when I'm getting stuck, but also within my organizational process, is to separate the two so that we can elevate arts as a profession that requires training, whether that's in the academy or in the school of life, and makes creativity more accessible, because so often art is exclusive. It can be, people view it as elitist. There are pay barriers to it. But creativity is an innate human skill. Everyone has it. Some people suppress it while others people develop it, but it's there in every person. And anyone who has come across a child has seen that. Yeah. And it's one of the saddest things for me as a teacher was watching children grow and watching creativity fall out of their reach as they got submerged in what our culture unfortunately values more. So my work is really trying to help people rediscover that innate creativity. And I think by doing that, it does celebrate arts as a profession, and it celebrates the fact that artistic professions require training, require thought and dedication. We wouldn't say everyone is a doctor or everyone is a lawyer, but we do sometimes say everyone is an artist. So I try and shy away from that a little bit.
Right. So you live in a tiny house. I have
I
tiny
do.
house envy. I do. And the name of your tiny house is wonderful in its French pronunciation. Aubergine is the name of your
Lovely.
tiny house. And for those of you who may not speak French or don't know the reference, it's eggplant, which is a beautiful color. Yes.
Yes.
So you have a philosophy behind your work, a very definite philosophy. So what is the connection with your building a tiny house?
Well, I built my house myself, despite having no construction experience, and I decided that the best way to do my first ever construction project would be as a public art project and do it on the front lawn of an art center for hundreds of people to see, which shows both my perhaps ambition and lack of judgment. But it worked well, which is a good thing. And that mindset to just make something, to leave aside the perfectionism that we so often chase, to put down this idea that we can only be good at one thing and instead embrace the fact that we all make things every single day. You know, whether you're making oxygen while breathing or footsteps while walking or the food or the art or even the spreadsheets, they count. Um, so I gave myself permission to do this thing that young women are not supposed to do. And I built my house. And actually, my co-project manager was my mother, who's worked in technical theater for decades. So she had all of the tool experience. And together we've made something that has been standing for, gosh, over 4 years now.
Wonderful. We are going to share a look at Aubergine with you folks out there. We have a time lapse tour of this wonderful, colorful, amazing tiny house. So can we roll that video, please? What a remarkable space, Miranda. Wow.
Thank you.
And that artwork behind you looks like some tiny houses. And you over the last few years have been presenting a tiny house festival, right?
That
Where,
is correct.
where, how, and will that happen again? I hope, because I'll be there.
Well, it certainly will. We unfortunately just announced that it will not be happening this year because
Mm.
having thousands of people in tiny spaces is pretty much the exact opposite of what we should be doing.
Indeed. Yep.
But we've hosted it 5 times so far. So, and it's been in a different city every time, which kind of echoes my growth trajectory. We started out in Somerville, made it to Concord, which is where I built my house and where this was created. There's actually a little painting of my house within the painting, which was a sweet addition by the muralists who made this. We made it through Stoughton, Marshfield, and then last year we were in Beverly. So it's an incredibly joyful event. We host it to help normalize the idea of living an alternative lifestyle so that people can experience these tiny houses that maybe they've seen on TV or they've read articles about, and meet the people who live inside of them. Because I think anytime you humanize something, anytime you add story back to something, kind of like what Brian was talking about, journalism is trying to do, seems like a particularly difficult job right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think inviting people into the spaces makes it real. So I've actually had 10,000 people tour my 160 square foot house.
Oh, wow. And do you think some of those people just went, "Oh, I got to have one of these. I have to live like this." That's a
Yeah,
big jump. That's a big jump.
it is a big jump. And there are certainly, I mean, the large portion of people, it's kind of just curiosity for sure. And then there are people who come and say, "Oh, well, maybe I'll do something a little smaller. I'm thinking of downsizing, but not this small." But there are definitely people. I've actually, some good friends of mine, Jesse and Nora, run the Tiny Traveling Theater. She's doing something with the Shakespeare Company in Boston right now. But they came to my festival as volunteers in 2017. And then the next year they brought their house.
Oh,
And now they are our stage at the festival every year.
terrific.
So there's certainly a growth and a community in this movement.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's your long-term dream, Miranda?
Well, when I was in graduate school, I went to study community art because I wanted to start a community art center. And while there, I came up with a slightly different idea, which is a community art hotel. So the concept is what's embodied in my tiny house, which is a space where everything around you, from the food to the furniture to the dishes to potentially the house or room itself, is made by artists who have studios on site. So you get to experience the art firsthand through your stay at the hotel, and then you get to meet those artists. And it breaks down the wall between the consumer and the creator, between the artist and the audience, and helps reconnect art to daily life for more and more people.
Well, I certainly I'm looking forward to when you can continue with that project. Now I would love you to share your one of your many hats as a singer-songwriter. What are you going to sing for us tonight?
So I decided to share the first song that I wrote in COVID, which is dedicated to a friend of mine who lost her father right at the beginning of all of this in March. And it's interesting, at the beginning of this, I was painting, because for me, painting is very meditative, and when the world is in chaos, you need stillness. But then after 2 months of stillness, I needed to say something. So I've been writing a lot of songs, written about 5 or 6, which for me sometimes takes a year and a half in the past month, and this was the very first one of them.
Wow. Well, can't wait to hear it. Stage is yours, Miranda.
All right, thank you. This is called Hold On, and it's for anybody who has lost somebody or lost something in this time. I'm holding you in my heart tonight, whether you're miles away or just out of sight. Hold on to me, if you would be so kind. I need your strength tonight to help me pass it by. It's a hard time. Nights are cold and the days are still. It's a long time until I can see you again. So let me send my love instead. Feel the warmth inside your chest. Hold on. hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on.
Lovely. So that was the first song you wrote during the pandemic, and we got to see your paintings. It sounds like you've been pretty prolific. So I know there are some people who find that their artistic practice was interrupted during the pandemic, uh, or they wanted to start some kind of artistic practice. What advice would you give people under those circumstances?
Well, I think creativity is a balancing act, and I liked the fact that you used habit. I think that's very true. Is that creativity is a habit. I kind of push back against the sparks of inspiration concept and instead embrace the fact that you need to show up every day. And in a time period like this, you can show up and not do anything.
Mm.
I can't tell you how many times I've gone to my studio just to be there, to smell the oil paints and be surrounded by the colors. And I've sat there and done nothing, and I've sat there and cried. But I've still been there, and I've still shown up. And I think in this time in particular, it's a difficult balancing act between discipline and generosity, between forcing yourself to make something and comforting yourself when you have nothing to make. And I think creativity often is that cycle. But right now in particular, we need to hold both in tandem.
Mm-hmm. So wise for one so young. You're an extraordinary
Thank
woman,
you.
Miranda. And it's been such a pleasure talking with you about your work and about the way you live your life. And I will be first in line to see that beautiful aubergine someday. So you take care and
Absolutely.
continue being an inspiration because you are. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. It was a joy to be here.
Bye bye. Thanks so much to Miranda and Brian for sharing their work, their creative intelligence. An amazing couple of people, both of whom I would like to get to know better. And if you would like to see more from All Together Now, please like and subscribe on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And if you enjoy All Together Now, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to support the show and the artists who appear with us. The link is in the comments section. Click on See More on Facebook and Show More on YouTube. And 60% of the funds raised will be paid directly to the artists who appear on the show. We'll see you next Thursday with some very special folks. And until then, keep a song in your heart and hold a good thought. And remember, don't make art, just make something. Good night.